Hello and welcome. This is June Collier from Make Your Money Work For You. In this short training, I will be discussing a very important step that you should follow before you begin investing: building an emergency fund. The Before You Invest series are important lessons. Do not skip these lessons on your way to becoming an investor. Again, my name is June Collier, and I'm an investor and personal finance trainer. My goal in this course is to teach you why having an emergency fund will hedge you against minor mishaps that can occur unexpectedly in your life. When emergencies happen, it can be a financial crisis for many Americans. In fact, Bankrate recently reported that 63% of Americans do not have enough savings to cover a $500 emergency expense. With the recent coronavirus pandemic, GoBankingRates reported around 25% of U.S. adults say that they have no emergency savings at all, while more than 23% say they only have enough money to cover their bills for 1 to 3 weeks. Most people said that in order to meet the cost of an unexpected expense, they would have to either change their lifestyle and cut back, charge the expense to a credit card, or lean on family and friends to borrow money. You cannot possibly be an investor if you do not have an emergency fund. Investing can quickly take a back seat when it comes to basic survival. This is why it's important to build an emergency fund first before you start investing. So, what exactly is an emergency fund? An emergency fund is a bank account with money set aside whose only purpose is to cover large unexpected expenses. Notice I said unexpected expenses. That does not include a new set of tires, because you know you're going to eventually need new tires and you should be budgeting for that. An emergency is your transmission going out, a winter pipe burst, a hot water heater leak that causes a flood in your basement. Those are emergencies. The emergency fund should only be used for true emergencies. A 50% sale at Macy's does not deem reason to tap into your emergency fund. The emergency fund must be liquid. As much as you might be tempted to invest your emergency fund, it is not a great idea, and I will discuss later why. You should have your emergency fund parked in a high-yield savings or money market account. More on that later as well. And finally, if an emergency does happen where it requires you to use it, you must immediately go back to funding the emergency fund until it is back to where it was before. So how much do you need to save? That answer depends on your obligations and monthly expenses. For most people, a short-term emergency fund is 6 months worth of living expenses. So if it takes $3,000 per month to run your household, your short-term emergency fund would be about $18,000. Now, I know that can be a huge amount to save, so I suggest starting with a mini emergency fund, which is $1,000 to $3,000. This should cover most emergency situations. A great component to investing is time. You don't want to lose all your time by trying to build a fully funded emergency fund. So once the mini fund is funded, determine what percentage of your money you're going to start investing, and then use the rest to continue funding your emergency fund. Ultimately, you want to have a long-term emergency fund of 12 to 18 months. This is a fund that protects you in case of a job loss. In today's economy, it is not unrealistic for a person to be actively job hunting for 12 months or longer. This fund helps if you should be so unfortunate. Now, it can be tempting to take your emergency fund and put it into the market. After all, it's just sitting there in a savings account doing nothing. Don't be tempted to invest your emergency fund. The stock market can be volatile, and in a few short weeks, you can see your investments quickly move 20% or more against you, even if you're holding great stocks. An example has been during this coronavirus pandemic, where many great companies are trading 30 to 40% off from their 52-week highs. You do not want an emergency to occur in your life at the same time when the stock market is down. You would be forced to sell your stocks at a loss just to cover your emergency. This is not smart. Do not invest your emergency fund into the market. A few years ago, I created a video titled "Wealthy People Don't Use Banks." In that video, I described how banks were ripping people off by paying measly interest rates on money sitting in checking and savings accounts. In fact, the rates were so low that I guaranteed you would lose money by putting it into these cash equivalents that the bank offered. Let me explain. Traditional banks pay 0.05% or less on savings accounts. That's not even 0.5%. That's 1/5 of 1%. Meanwhile, inflation is growing at the average of 2% per year. Inflation is the cost of goods and services rising. For example, a man in 1965 could take his family of 4 out to eat breakfast for less than $10. That same family today would spend $40 or more for the same meal. That's inflation. In my chart, I show $1,000 being deposited into a bank savings account paying 0.05% interest. At the end of the year, that $1,000 earns 50 cents, while the inflation on that $1,000 1 year later is $20. That's a net loss of $19.50. And as you can see, the more money you have in the bank, the bigger your losses. That's why I dislike traditional banking. I believe that online banking will become the future of banking. We live in a technology world where we no longer need to go inside a bank to handle any of our transactions. We can pay bills online, deposit checks by simply scanning it with our cell phone. We can even send payments to one another with a bank app. Online banking has become so much more efficient and has dramatically cut the cost of unnecessary expenses. Imagine the money saved with not having brick and mortar branches all over the country. And that's just one way online banking has saved money. Because online banks don't have the expense of maintaining branches, they can offer high interest savings accounts that pay many times more than the national average. This is why you should seek an online bank to park your emergency fund. Conduct a quick Google search for high yield savings accounts, and you will be flooded with offers from online banks that rival the rates traditional banks are offering. What is a high yield savings account, you might ask? This is a savings account with a variable rate typically higher than retail brick and mortar banks. High yield savings accounts may come with some limits, such as a maximum of 6 withdrawals or debits per monthly statement cycle. But that should not be a problem due to the fact you are parking your emergency fund here. Recently, the Federal Reserve drastically cut lending rates. This has caused many banks to follow suit, including online banks. So the options of high yield savings are not as plenty as they once were just a mere 2 months ago. However, there are still a few online banks that offer some of the strongest rates in comparison to what's available today. Discover Bank, American Express, and Ally Bank all offer higher than average annual percentage yields on their savings accounts. These yields won't make you rich, but they will help you with hedging inflation. In summary, creating a short-term emergency fund before investing has many more pros than cons. Remember, it's not a matter of if you have an emergency, it's a matter of when. Don't have a financial crisis when you could have had a minor inconvenience by simply having an emergency fund. You should start with a mini emergency fund of $1,000 to $3,000 before you start investing. Once you have funded the mini fund, start taking a portion of your money and invest while simultaneously using the other portion to continue to build your emergency fund. It will take you some time to build up your long-term emergency fund. Take your time and stick to your plan, and you will get there before you know it. Find a high-yield savings account to park this money so that you can hedge against inflation eating away at your savings. Thank you for watching this short presentation. I hope it has given you some things to consider before you start investing in the stock market.